Well, hey there, I'm Brian Goulet of GouletPens.com, and I'm here for episode number 89 of Goulet Q&A. It is July 31st of 2015, and I really can't believe that this year is more than half over. It's kind of crazy. It's really gone fast. But I don't have to tell you that because you're right there along with me. So, been up to a few things. Margaret and Madigan, both of our community coordinators, have been off this week. So it's been a little bit of an adjusted schedule for me because I and Rachel also have helped to cover all of our social media platforms, which we're on quite a few of them. So you may have seen that we've been posting a little less frequently. That's because we have had basically most of our media team out. So that's okay. They've been taking a well-deserved vacation, and then they'll be coming back hitting it hard next week. So I've been trying to cover everything. It's been neat to engage directly with everybody. So that's been fun. Been periscoping pretty regularly. Got a pretty decent following on there now. And we're trying to make it more of a regular thing. Rachel and I are doing some broadcasts at home, trying to do some around the office here. Showed off my pen cabinet the other day. So make sure that if you're not on Periscope yet, that you jump on there because we are using it and it is fun. It's kind of like a live Q&A. So basically, like, I can sit here and talk to you, except you can interrupt me and ask me questions as I'm talking. I'm very easily distracted when I'm in that type of setting, so you can see that it's kind of fun and engaging, and you can really direct where the conversation goes, which is a lot of fun. It's much more interactive, but still kind of fun. So, and then next week, Rachel and I are going to be gone for a few days. We mentioned this in our newsletter, but we're going to be staying at the Homestead Resort in Hot Springs, Virginia for a couple of days. Got a really good deal. It's a really inexpensive time of year to go, relatively speaking. It's a very expensive hotel, but that's where Rachel and I met when we were 17. We were at Virginia Honors Choir, which is like this state-level singing event. And it was hosted at the Homestead. So it was, it was like 5 people to a room back then to be able to afford it. But it was really nice. That's where Rachel and I met over a 3-day period. We were from different parts of the state, met there, stayed long distance for almost 2 years before we ended up at Virginia Tech together. So, that was about 14 years ago almost that we met. And this will be the first time we've gone back to that hotel since we met. We first talked to each other at the bowling alley. Yes, there is a bowling alley in the hotel. So it's going to be pretty wild. So we plan on bowling together, and we're going to just walk around the same halls that we walked around when we had those first days together 14 years ago. So it's going to be pretty wild. We're really excited about that. But we'll be gone for a few days, and then we'll be coming back. So you're not going to notice any difference really from us being gone because I'm still going to be shooting Q&A everything next week. So we should be in good shape there. Let's see here. We got some new products that we launched this week. The Cross Century 2. Got a video and blog post up on that on Wednesday, so you can go check that out. It's kind of like a mid-range cross pen in between the Classic Century and the Townsend. So it's kind of neat. Herbin Fountain Pen, which I don't have handy, but thought I did. I must have filed it away. But yeah, that's a new pen from Herbin. If you're familiar with the Herbin Rollerball, it's that same like size and type of pen, except it's got a fountain pen nib on it. So for $15, it's decent little demonstrator pen. So you can check that out on our site. We've got the new Platinum 3776 limited edition Yamanaka. It's the 4th out of 5 limited edition pens that they're doing in a series of all the lakes around Mount Fuji. And it's kind of nice. It's got this nice, almost like a guilloche kind of pattern to it. Not quite all the way around. It's kind of neat. Check out the pictures. Sarah did a really good job. Very hard pen to photograph, but she did a really good job kind of nailing some of the details on that one. They are individually numbered. They're making 3,776 of them. It's kind of cool, but it's basically a demonstrator, clear demonstrator, 3776. So it's pretty cool. And then also we found out we got the Pilot Vanishing Point stubs finally coming in. They are set to arrive today, Friday, when this video launches. So unless there's something crazy that happens, we're planning to have them available pretty much as soon as you watch this video, so you can go check those out. You can get those individually as nib units, just the Pilot Vanishing Point nib units in either a rhodium trim or a like a kind of a black trim, ruthenium trim, or you can get it in 3 different pens installed on the pens. So it's not available on all of the pens, but on certain pens you can get them. I can't recall exactly which ones. Check the website. But you can also get them separately if you already have a Vanishing Point, you just want a stub nib for it. It's pretty cool. I have a video that I did on that a while ago. You can check that one out as well. And that's pretty much it for updates. So I've got, 11 questions for this week, pretty decent ones. Big chunks of questions and categories here. I don't have a wide range of different topics, but the questions bounce around a little bit, so it should be kind of interesting. So I'm going to start off with the pens and writing questions. Got 3 of those. John S. in an email asked me, it said, I'm a fountain pen newbie, just getting used to my Pilot Metropolitan, Lamy Logo, TWSBI Mini, and the Lamy Al-Star Copper Orange. Lots of great intro pens there. I'm using different inks in each pen, but have 25 to 30 ink samples I want to try. Can you recommend another pen for me to use as an ink sampler that would be easy to clean between samples? Sure. So I got a few options for you. One that I really like is a glass pen, like this one. This is a Herbin glass pen. There's several different color options and things like that. You're going to pay, about what you would for a, Lamy Safari or something like that for one of these. So the way that these things work is they're made of glass, literally, so you have to kind of be careful not to drop them or anything like that. But it has these flutes that are in the nib here. You just dip it in the ink, and the ink kind of sits in these flutes. And then when you write, it kind of just flows down. Now, they do write wetter than fountain pens, so you have to kind of account for that. So your ink may appear a little darker, a little more saturated than it would in a fountain pen. So that's kind of the one dislike that I have against the glass pen, is it tends to write much wetter than a regular fountain pen. But it's the thing that I like the most about it for this sampling purpose is that it's really easy to clean. So if you want to sample up a whole bunch of, 25 to 30 inks, that's no small task there to try to sample all those up. So if you have an ink sample like this, the glass pen, you literally just kind of dip it in there, just kind of wipe it off, and then you write however much you want. And then you can literally have like a glass of water sitting there. You just kind of swish it around in the glass of water, take a paper towel or whatever and wipe it off. And then you can do it again. Like, you don't have to get up, you don't have to clean anything. So you can do, probably in about an hour, you can do all 25 to 30 of those samples. Whereas if you have a full-on inked up pen, you got to go over to your sink or whatever, clean it out in between each one. That can really be kind of a pain, but it might be worth it. So that's the next option I'll give you, is I like to test, when I'm testing out inks or doing ink reviews and stuff like that, I kind of standardize on a Lamy pen. And I like to use either a Vista or an Al-Star. And the reason I like to do that is because the grip is clear. So what I do is I will have that, and then I don't have a converter right there, but I've got one right here. Okay, yes, I have a bag of Lamy converters for just this purpose. So I will take a Lamy converter, put it in here, and part of what takes so long when you're testing lots of inks is cleaning out the pen in between, because you want to make sure it's super clean. That way when you go to ink up your next one, you're in good shape to go. So what I like to do, and the reason I like to use the Lamy, is because I can get these clear grips here. So, and it has interchangeable nibs. So I can take different nibs, switch an extra fine, broad, whatever, italic, and I can try different nibs without having to re-ink the pen. That is one of the really cool aspects of the Lamy. So what I'll do is I'll ink it up, but I'll be very strategic about how I do it. Because the grip is clear, I will basically only suck up enough ink so that it fills the feed and it doesn't actually go into the converter. That allows me to get, a decent half page worth of writing, depending on the paper and the, all the nib size and various factors, but I can get a really good amount of writing, and then I have a perfectly clean converter. I don't have to clean out the converter. And then when it comes time to clean the pen, all I have is the grip to worry about. I'll use a bulb syringe like so, purchased on gouletpens.com, and you can just stick it right in the back when it's filled with water and then flush it through to clean this out. And you can see very easily when you've flushed it all out. And then once it's flushed, you just take a paper towel like this, touch it to the nib, it kind of sucks all the extra water out, and then you've got a clean pen. So if you want a legitimately inked up pen to write with to do your sample, that's going to be the most accurate, you know, color representation when you're testing ink samples like that. But it's minimal cleanup, so you're only going to be able to write but so much because you're just writing with what's in the feed, and you're basically just using the converter as kind of a vacuum to get the ink in there. But it's a little bit better method than just like dipping the fountain pen into it. That's another option for you, is if you don't have a converter, or if you don't want to risk getting your converter dirty or whatever, you can literally just take the pen and just dip it into the ink and then write with it. That's not necessarily always the most accurate way to do it, because especially if you have a pen like this Lamy where there are no fins on the outside of the feed, all the fins are on the inside. When you dip it, you're not going to get a whole lot of ink everywhere. So you're only going to be able to write as much as you would probably with a dip pen. So a couple of words maybe. And then even still, you're going to have a lot of excess ink on here, and it might kind of pour out, gush out, and might not be much better representation than what you would get with a glass pen. So I like to actually kind of suck the ink up in there and then still wipe off the nib and everything, and kind of, you know, get the excess ink off of there so that you're kind of writing with more of the normal writing. So that's the method that I really like to do when I'm doing an ink review, or I want something where I want the most accurate kind of representation of what it is. If I'm going for just a quick glance at it, glass pen will work really well. And then that's kind of my two methods there. Another option is to use an actual dip pen, but those really kind of vary, and I don't generally prefer those quite as much, just because a lot of them are made for thicker calligraphy ink. So unless you have one that has an ink reservoir on it, and if you don't know what I'm talking about at all, you probably just shouldn't mess with it. But I do have it. I do believe I have it on my video. I'm looking at that brow set that I have right over there. I wish I kind of grabbed it to show you. But I've got a video on it. If you look at Fountain Pen 101 ink sampling, you can check out how I use that on there. So a dip pen is another option. I don't sell any dip pens, so I don't really have anything great to show you. But that's another thing that's kind of a similar concept to the glass pen. But you can get certain dip nibs that might look a little closer to a fountain pen, but still the most accurate one is going to be actually inking up a pen. Cool, hope that helps you out, John. All right, Bippy S on Facebook asked, I have elementary piano students who become fascinated with my fountain pen and want to save up their practice points to get one of their own. What would be a great starter pen for a 10-year-old? I suggested a Pilot Varsity, but they want the experience of inking on their own. So for those of you not familiar with the Pilot Varsity, Bippy, I think the Pilot Varsity is a good option. Might be something great to keep near the piano just for those who maybe are kind of interested and you want just something to hand over to them so they can write with it. The nice thing about the Varsity is that it's preloaded with ink, so you don't have to really worry about that inking and cleaning aspect of fountain pen usage. It's basically an eyedropper pen, so the whole body's filled with ink. It's got, you know, the fins and everything, and it's actually a pretty smooth writer, pretty reliable writer. But it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. 7 different color options for you. This is kind of the old design. They've updated the design. It looks even cooler now. But that's basically how this works. For $3, you know, you're getting a pretty decent pen for that, and you can hand it to someone, you know, a 10-year-old, and you don't really have to worry about them breaking it or losing it or anything like that. So kind of minimal fuss. So I recommend the Varsity, especially if you have people that know nothing. I mean, not even just kids, but just anybody who knows nothing about fountain pens at all and is just curious about them. You can hand it to them, show them, be like, oh yeah, this is kind of a cheap one, but you know, this is how it works, and they can write with it. And if they, you know, write with it upside down and bend the nib and all that stuff, you really don't have to worry about it. You can just be like, no, this probably isn't your thing. Don't hand them over your, you know, your Pilot Custom 823 or something for somebody who's never written with a fountain pen before. But it should get you, you know, be able to get it in people's hands without you having to stress about it too much. But if the kids are really liking the whole inking up aspect of it, I got a couple options for you. Maybe a Platinum Preppy might be a good option. It's a clear pen. It's only a couple of dollars. Now you do have to pay a little bit more if you want to get the converter to go with it. So that puts it more into like the $11, $12 range with the converter. You can also convert that to an eyedropper. That's a little advanced for a 10-year-old probably to do if they've never done anything with fountain pens. So maybe I wouldn't quite go that route, but the Preppy is an option if you want to buy a bunch of pens and then show kids how to ink it up. Could be an option for you. Also, I think the Pilot Metropolitan is a really good option, and I'm realizing I didn't pull one of those, but I can show you what I've got there. Pilot Metropolitan is really nice because it's a $15 pen. It's metal, it's very durable, and the kids can get a good inking up experience. So here's a Metropolitan, and the way that it inks up is it just has a squeeze bladder on it. So you just squeeze it, put it down in the ink, let it go, you know, hold on to it somewhat, but you know, let go of the bladder, ink draws up into it, wipe off the nib, you know, put it back on, and you're good to write. The only disadvantage of this one, as far as like a 10-year-old is concerned, is the bladder is not clear, so you can't really see how much ink is in there. You can't see when you've properly inked it, so it might not be as cool as like a clear pen would be. That's where I would go maybe with a Lamy Vista or a Safari because it's got lots of cool colors. You know, there's an ink window in there so you can see your ink level. You can see when you're properly filling it and stuff like that. These are a little bit more of an investment. They're, you know, around $30. So you got to make sure that your kids have saved up a lot of their practice points, that they really know their stuff in that way. But that is another really good one. You know, nibs are replaceable on here. They're swappable. So if the kids do bear down on them really hard or drop them or something, not that 10-year-olds would ever drop their pens anywhere, but you know, you have options there. So that's another route that I think might be worth your looking at. Cool. All right. I got a cough drop and feeling a little bit of a tickle going on, so forgive me. And I just like had it sitting up in my cheeks for a long time and it kind of like got stuck, you know what I mean? All right, anyway, too much information. All right, at Jerry10to13 on Twitter asked, is it possible to tighten a screw cap too much? I've always been tightening them a lot because I don't want my pen to dry out. And then I followed up a little bit, and Jerry was specifically talking about the TWSBI 580, which I have right here. So TWSBI 580 is a demonstrator pen, and it has threads here with an O-ring. So it has an O-ring, which means that it's got a little bit of give as far as when you tighten it down. And this pen specifically has a plastic insert on here, which helps to seal up the nib. So as far as your pen not drying out, so basically once your nib makes contact with that seal, it's sealed. You can tighten it down more, but it's not going to seal more. Once it's sealed, it's sealed. Basically, once you start to over tighten it, all you're doing is putting extra stress on that insert, extra stress on the threads, on the cap, and on the body. It's not really helping anything to over tighten it. So yes, it is possible to tighten too much. And there's other pens that maybe don't have, you know, a positive stop where they are. I think specifically of like Edison pens, for example, where the threads are kind of shallow and just cut right into the material. You over tighten those, you can risk cracking, you know, an acrylic or a plastic cap. You can risk stripping the threads on plastic or metal pens. So you really don't want to go any more than you need to. Once you get a fair amount of resistance, you just stop. You know, your cap shouldn't be falling off, but once it's on firmly enough where it's in place, that pretty much is enough. And going more than that is really just kind of putting extra wear and tear on your threads, on your cap, and it's not particularly going to help anything. Now, in this particular instance, the TWSBI is reinforced with this metal band here, which helps to kind of add some extra strength to these threads. But even still, you know, it's still a plastic pen, so if you're providing too much stress, it can still crack. So I wouldn't go too nuts on tightening your pen. All right, I got some ink questions now. This one is from Brendel L on Facebook. Where can I find discontinued inks? I like the Caran d'Ache Saffron very much. Yes, so Caran d'Ache Saffron, that ink was discontinued. Caran d'Ache discontinued their entire ink line a couple of years ago, and then they came out with the new line of inks with the slanted bottles that you see. So if you want any of the old stuff like Amazon, Saffron, Caribbean Sea, Grand Canyon, there were some really good colors in the old series that I liked and I miss very much at this point. But if you want those, you know, once they're sold out from the manufacturer, once they're not being made anymore, retailers like me who normally buy them from the manufacturer sell them and then have them no more unless they held them back or unless they haven't yet sold them. So if you want to get them from an authorized retailer per se, then you basically will not be able to find them much longer after they're stopped being made. So we haven't had them in 2 years here at Goulet. So pretty much most other retailers won't have them either at this point. 2 years out is a kind of a long time to still be hanging on to some ink. That said, there could be some retailers out there that may still have a bottle here and there sitting around. So if you hunt around a little bit, you might be able to find a new bottle, but probably you're going to be looking at a used bottle or new old stock from somebody's got that was saving it or something like that. So that happens a lot of times whenever, part of the reason that a retailer like me might run out so quickly once it's discontinued is because once people hear that it's discontinued, they want to stock up. So even if I have a decent supply, as soon as a manufacturer announces, hey, we're not making this anymore, everybody says, oh my gosh, I need to buy 3 or 4 bottles so it can last me the next several years. And then they go and they buy it all up everywhere. So it disappears pretty quickly from most retailers immediately after it's announced that it's not going to be made anymore. Specifically when it's like a whole line of inks that's discontinued like that. Other times the manufacturer will kind of keep it quiet that they're not making anymore, and then basically we don't get any notification, and it's basically like we go to reorder it and they're just saying, oh yeah, well, we're not making it anymore, sorry, you can't get any more. And then we have to come out and tell you, well, okay, this isn't available anymore, we don't have any, but sorry. You know, and then you have to kind of hunt around and it just kind of disappears. So basically what I'm getting at is you're probably at this point, if you want saffron or any other discontinued ink like that, you're going to need to go to a private party seller. So somebody like on Fountain Pen Network or eBay or maybe some other kind of forum or blog or whatever where people resell, you know, stuff like that. That's pretty much the route you're going to need to go if you want to get an ink that's 2 years discontinued or more. All right, Fernanda B on Facebook. What's up, Fernanda? Fernanda had a bunch of questions here. So I only have 11 questions this week, but Fernanda asked like 40. So I'm gonna try and cover as many as I can. There's some really good ink questions though, so I wanted to cover them all. So Fernanda's got like a 5-in-1 question situation going on here. All right, here we go. About inks, it's only about their colors. In your opinion, what's the most beautiful one other than blue? Parentheses, got you there. So Fernanda knows that I like blue and that's where it's going to end up. So obviously my favorite color is blue, and that would give you a pretty boring answer because I've answered that many times. But next to that, this is probably not going to please you all that much, but turquoise is probably my next favorite ink color aside from that. So Diamond Marine, I love that. I'm really digging Jerevan Emerald of Chivor, which we should have here in the next couple of weeks. It's starting to arrive in some places. I know ours is on the way. I've been talking with you know, our distributor for Jerevan, and they said it's on the way. They're giving me tracking updates and stuff like that. We're gonna have a good amount of it coming, so just wait for that. It just blows my mind. That ink is really, really cool. But okay, if the whole turquoise thing is not quite satisfying or enough of an answer for you, Fernanda, and it's not quite enough of a deviation from blue, I would say probably Noodler's Apache Sunset would be probably the most beautiful one, just because of the intense shading. Orange and like yellow colors are not generally my favorite as far as ink goes, but just that particular ink is just fantastic. So that would be my answer if you wouldn't settle for a turquoise. All right, next question she asked, what color you can't stand to use or hate? I don't really hate any ink. There's definitely some that I really don't have a preference for, or some that I just don't really understand. So I'll kind of lump them into a category. I really don't like weak red inks, like red inks that lean pink. There's so many of them, and I don't understand why, because they don't sell well. They're not that, you know, useful for the most part. I would rather have a pink. If I'm going for pink, just go for a real pink, or go for just a strong red. But that kind of in between pinky red kind of color, I don't like it. I just don't like it. It's a preference thing. Of course, if you like that, please don't be offended, but it bugs me. I don't like it. There's so many of them too. So inks that I'm thinking about are like platinum red, Lamy red, Omas red. A lot of the reds that come from pen manufacturers are kind of this weak pinky red. I don't know why. I know red dyes are a little more challenging to use, you know, and they're not quite as light fast and stuff like that, but still, there's just so many weak reds out there. So that would be it. Other ones that I dislike are ones with misleading names. So ones that say like Stipula dark red. It's not dark red, it's like a pinky red. You know, it's not dark. Diamine dark brown. It's like a light brown, really, it's not dark. Pelican brilliant brown. That one takes the cake for me. Brilliant brown. It's just like an oxymoron to me. There's nothing brilliant about a brown. So it's like things like that where it's like you really can't get a good impression of what the color is supposed to be by the name. So that's really kind of more of a marketing thing, and I get that. And a lot of these are like international brands that when they translate them to English and all this kind of stuff, you know, some of it gets lost in translation. I totally get that, and I don't mean to pick on anybody. It's just my personal preference is I don't like those ones. So that's kind of it. What's the most different or unique one that you've ever seen? So I've actually kind of already covered a couple of these. Emerald of Chivor is really just a unique ink. Basically all of the Jeroboam 1670 inks are pretty unique, with sparkle and sheen and flecks of gold and all kinds of craziness going on in there that you just don't see in other inks. Another really unique one, well, Apache Sunset obviously would fall in there because of the shading, but Blue Ghost would have to go in there too. It's an invisible ink. You can mix it with other inks, and you can. It's a UV resistant, or it's not resistant, but it's a UV reactive ink, so it glows under black light, which is just cool. So Noodler's has several inks actually that glow under black light, but that one specifically is one that you can't see unless you have a black light. So it's really kind of cool. That one's really unique. Diamine Majestic Blue, I'll throw that in there too, because it's a really dark blue with an intense red sheen. I just love that combination. It's one of my favorite inks that I use. So that would fit in that category. And then lastly, to follow it up, asked, and about scented inks, do you like them, use them? Which ones are your favorite, least favorite in terms of smell? I'm gonna let you down on this one. I really don't use scented inks personally. I don't really like them. It's not my thing. There's nothing wrong with them, but I think the thing that kind of disappoints me about scented inks is that the scent, it's not like using perfume on a letter and then the person that receives it is going to be just awash in this flowery scent. It's not really like that. You smell the scented ink while you're writing with it, but it doesn't last long. It certainly won't last days while you're mailing a letter to someone else. So it's kind of disappointing in that way. It's really more for the person that is writing it to have that kind of smell or experience while you're doing it. For me, that just, it's a neat thing, but it really doesn't like sway me one way or another. I care more about how the ink looks and performs than I do about how it smells. So maybe other people feel differently, but it's just, so in that respect, I don't really have a favorite because none of them are really all that strong to me unless you literally like stick your nose up and snort it, and then you can smell it. But if you're writing, it's always going to be kind of faint, and I don't have a very like attuned nose for most of that stuff. So a lot of the flower smells, like it's pretty much Diatramentis that has a lock on scented inks. A lot of them smell the same to me. So every now I can smell like the Scottish whiskey one, like that one smells different, you know, and some of them are a little stronger or whatever, but a lot of the flowery ones kind of smell the same to me. So, you know, that's just kind of where I'm coming from. That's why I haven't reviewed a lot of scented inks and stuff like that, is because it's not my thing. Everybody's got a thing, it's not my thing. All right, Kevin L has a question for me. I recently saw a video presentation by the other Brian of Edison Pens dealing with nib smoothing and tine adjustment. Good video. It was very informative, but there was no mention of any ink factor with a nib that does not function as one would like. Do you consider the ink being used before reaching for the loop and smoothing materials for a persnickety nib? So I know Brian Gray, he's a great guy. Him and I have Skyped quite a bit and done some like nib tuning stuff together. He's kind of taught me most of what I know. I took Richard Binder's nib tuning class at the DC show last year, but even before that, Brian Gray and I have been talking about nib tuning and smoothing and stuff like that for a while. So I'm kind of familiar with where he's coming from for his nib tuning stuff. And kind of the blanket statement I think I can say is that Yes, ink can be a factor in your writing experience, certainly. It's mainly a factor with flow, like how wet something is. It's less of a factor with how smooth a nib feels. Now, there are some subtleties. You can definitely feel some inks feel a little smoother than others. But mainly, I think a lot of that has to do with some of the lubricants that are in the ink, and then also if you have a wetter writing ink, you are gonna put less pressure down while you're writing, so the nib will feel a little smoother. So I think there's some of that variance going on that you're kind of adjusting to the ink. So it's not necessarily the ink is making your nib smoother necessarily. So there's a bit of that going on, but basically it's kind of like if you have a car, right, and you want your car to perform a certain way, putting like high test gas instead of the cheap stuff can make a difference. But if you ultimately want your car to really perform differently, you need to adjust the engine or the tuning in the car. You know, you don't say, oh, well, I'm gonna put different gas in it and then my car will be faster or better or whatever. It's like, okay, there will be some difference based on the gas you put in, but really it's gonna matter how the car is tuned and maintained and adjusted, and then what parts might be swapped out and stuff like that. That's gonna matter a lot more than the type of gas you use. I guess that's a pretty good analogy. I pretty much just came up with that on the fly. So tell me if that's a good analogy or not. So nib guys, pen guys, gals, whoever it is that is working on these things, the ink is a factor, but I think they care a lot less about the ink. They want the tool to work properly. And then the ink will provide some variance on top of however it's tuned. So basically, a lot of the nib folks that I know will kind of just use like one ink or a couple of inks that they're familiar with as a baseline, and they kind of tune off of that. So most of the nib folks I know don't really have vast experience testing out all different kinds of inks. They have a lot more experience with pens, and then they have a few inks, but you know, when I've talked to like folks like Brian Gray and others, you know, I talk to them about ink and all this kind of stuff, and they're like, oh, I've never used that, I've never used that, I've never used this, you know, because they're dealing with pens and tuning all day. They're not testing out 600 different inks, you know what I mean? So they don't really look at that. They don't come from that lens of, let's use the ink to adjust. I think as users, you know, and I came from a user crowd, you know what I mean? Like I came into this hobby not knowing anything about it. I kind of got into the pen business really as a novice, and so I've learned right along like you guys do. Like you've seen the videos I've put out, very heavy user focus, very heavy kind of newbie getting into the hobby focus, because that's literally what I did. So I wanted to kind of you know make a path that followed the way that I went, so that I could make it easier for anybody else who kind of followed the same path. So for me, the first year that I was in this pen business, I didn't sell any pens. I knew nothing about tuning and all that kind of stuff. Really, it was all about ink and paper for me. So I learned to adjust my writing experience based on ink and paper. And there's definitely some factors you can weigh out there. However, when you get into like nib tuning and adjustment and stuff like that, you find that you can have a much greater influence over how a pen writes by doing some tuning stuff. Now there is more specialization that's involved in that. There's more experimentation that's involved, a lot of practice. You're gonna ruin some nibs, you're gonna do some dumb things, and you need to be educated a little bit about how to do it. And you need some special, you know, somewhat specialized tools. You know, you can't just use like wet sandpaper. You need some like micro mesh and stuff like that, and a loop and things. So basically, when it comes down to somebody like Brian Gray's lens, he's always gonna grab the pen and go to adjust it first. You know, me, where I'm coming from, when I speak to somebody, especially if they're newer into the hobby, they don't know anything about ink, so I'll kind of ask like, well, what ink are you using? Oh, you're using this really super dry ink? Maybe you should get a sample of this other wetter ink and see if you like that better, because they're kind of learning the ropes. I wouldn't take somebody that's brand new into the hobby and say, oh, here's a loop, here's micro mesh, you should practice adjusting and then you can have a better writing experience. They're not gonna know what the heck they're doing, and they could very well ruin their pen altogether and have a terrible experience and leave the hobby and never come back. So I always come from a lens of, let's go with the things that are safest to change and easiest not to screw up, and give somebody kind of the most experience in kind of the writing world in a positive way. And then if they're willing and able and want to get into tuning and adjustment and stuff, I will try to provide the tools and education in order to do that with proper disclaimers and all that kind of stuff, so that they can then make their experience even better once they've have a couple of different inks and so on. So that is something that I can probably work on a little bit, is just like, excuse me, some kind of general troubleshooting type stuff. I've thought about doing a troubleshooting 101 type thing, which is probably a great idea. Tell me in the comments, in the chat or whatever, if you do think it's a good idea to do kind of like a troubleshooting fountain pen 101. That probably would be a cool idea. But basically, that's kind of what's going on. So any nib tuner, nib person, pen maker of any kind is always going to come from a lens of, let's get the pen tuned and working properly first, and then your ink can kind of vary your experience from there. That's basically where they're coming from. So as long as you understand that, you'll be in a good place. Cool. Next question I have is from PV Shamlu on Twitter. Does increased wetness increase line width? I know it will on cheap paper, but what about on Rhodia? Okay, so basically you're talking about wetness of a pen or an ink. I'll kind of lump them both together because they can both be a factor. So will it increase line width? The short answer is maybe. So with absorbent paper, like you called it cheap paper, but I'll call it absorbent paper because cheap doesn't necessarily mean bad or good or whatever. Generally means bad, but absorbent paper will definitely have more spread. So that means that the ink, if it's wetter, more ink is coming out, which means that it's going to absorb more into the paper and spread out, and the line that you're seeing is going to look wider. A great example of this is if you use like a sticky note or an index card that's not, just like typical regular index card. Those are probably going to be a much wider line width than if you use something like Rhodia. Or if you want a really extreme example, take a paper towel or a tissue or something and just take your nib and drag it across, and you'll see it'll just soak in and spread out. So that's a very absorbent paper, and that will really cause it to spread out. So that just shows you kind of the extreme example of how your line width can change based purely off of changing the paper. So with that as a factor, if you have something like Rhodia, which is much less absorbent, you could assume that you're going to have less spread than you would have with a paper towel, just to give you two extremes of the example. So if you have a really wet pen, you can expect that it's going to change the factor a little bit, but even still you're going to have less spread going on Rhodia than you would on absorbent paper. So that pretty much will cover that, I think. It's kind of I'm trying to think of like a good metaphor or analogy or something to go with this, and it's escaping me. But basically, when you have a really absorbent paper, it's probably going to vary more in its line width based on how wet your pen or ink is. Whereas something like Rhodia that isn't very absorbent at all, rather than spreading out, the wetter your pen gets, the more it's just going to pool up and kind of leave like a darker, more saturated line on the page. And a really good example of this is when you're using a flex pen, because that really dumps ink on there. It's not going to spread out necessarily, but it's literally going to pool up and can sometimes even leave like a bubble of ink on the page that takes forever to dry, but it gives a good example of how it's not going to spread out like crazy. Whereas if you use it on something like a paper towel or really cheap paper, it's going to spread and just look like a caterpillar. So that kind of pretty much covers what I wanted to say about that. Now there are some exceptions as far as inks go. Things like fast drying inks, certain permanent inks have more of a propensity to soak in. Certain lubricated inks too tend to be more absorbent themselves and soak in, specifically the fast dry inks, because fast dry inks are formulated specifically to absorb quickly into the paper and spread out so that it doesn't smear. That's why they're designed that way. So even on a paper like Rhodia, it's going to spread out a little bit more than it would a conventional ink. So there are some inks that are exceptions, but for the most part, something like a Rhodia is going to hold tighter to its true line and it's just the color is going to look darker. And a more absorbent paper, it's going to spread out more, and the color is going to look more or less the same whether you have a wet pen or not. Pretty much cover it? Cool. All right, and I'm going to close it out with, I have 4 business questions this week. Just kind of ended up that way. I didn't cherry pick them. I just kind of went off of what the question was that was being asked. So first one I have is from Megan Nickel from the blog, or Nicole. Maybe I'm going crazy, but I could have sworn there was a blurb on the product pages for paper on the old site about a bulk ordering discount. Is that something you still do? I go through paper pretty quickly and should really just stock up and save you guys some effort instead of ordering 1 or 2 notebooks at a time. Yes, we would prefer this as well. This is something that we did used to have on the old site. That is absolutely true. It was actually fairly popular. It wasn't like everybody bought like 10 notebooks at a time, but it was fairly popular. So we would have an option for if you bought 5 notebooks of a given type, then you could get 5% off, and if it was 10 notebooks, it was 10% off. So it made it easier for us because a lot of times our notebooks come in packs of 5 or 10. And it's easier for us to pull it. It's easier for us to, check it and pack it and stuff like that. And paper is heavy, so we have, kind of a capped shipping amount for, especially in the U.S. You only have, it's a flat rate. Once you hit priority, you're never going to pay more. So for you to buy more paper at once is very advantageous for you as well, because paper is pretty heavy. So it was something that we had built into the old site. It was a compromise that we had to make when we switched over to our new site. Apparently, in order to structure that, it requires more than you would think probably it requires from a technical standpoint. So we still don't have that built in as a selected option on our site. It's kind of a pain, I know, and I'm sorry, and we're trying to get it back, but it's going to take some time still. Our new site is cool, but it requires the work of developers that are way smarter than me in that way. And we just haven't yet been able to allocate the time and resources to be able to make that happen. So it will happen eventually, but in the meantime, we basically have to kind of do it manually. So we're still willing to do it. So if you want it done, shoot us an email at info@gouletpens.com, or if you just want to go ahead and place the order and then let us know in your order comments when you place the order, say, hey, Brian said I can get 10% off when I buy 10 notebooks or more. Can you please apply that? We will go back and change it and give you that credit back. So that is basically how that has to work at the moment until we're able to program that in automatically. And I'm sorry, I know it's kind of a pain. It's a very manual process in that way, but it'll still get you there if you're just willing to kind of ask us for it. Cool? Next question I have is from Dale R on Facebook. With the slightly ridiculous amount of care you take in wrapping the inky contents of our little boxes, how many inks break in transit? 1%, 5%, etc. 5% break in transit? You really think it's 5%? That would not be very good business on my part if we were breaking 5% of our packages. No, it's way less than that. It's pretty unbelievably low. Like we say in the packing cards that we include that we pack with a slightly ridiculous amount of care. There's a reason why we do it that way, because we do not want you to get a broken or damaged shipment. We get feedback all the time of people saying that their mail carriers are gorillas or elephants or bears or whatever, all kinds of funny animal analogies. But basically their package looks like it's been through a war zone. But when it arrives, they open it up and everything inside is completely intact. So I think if we didn't pack the way that we do, we would see a lot more damage than we do. And not to pick on the post office, UPS and FedEx, it's all of them that all deal with so many packages every day. These packages are flying all over the country, all over the world. They go through automatic sorters. They're thrown on trucks. It's amazing the logistics that go into shipping stuff. It's really incredible. So knowing that, we pack them so that they can go through just about anything and arrive okay. You know, so that said, I don't have like exact numbers for you, because especially it depends on time frames and stuff like that. But I would say that we've only really kind of had a handful of packages that have had like just straight up broken ink bottles in there. Most of them have been in the winter time when it's been freezing and they're going to somewhere really cold. Because what happens is sometimes these things sit on mail trucks overnight and stuff like that. And if, you know, we can pack it with as much bubble wrap as we want, but if it's going to sit there in a truck overnight in negative 20-degree weather, I mean, not that that happens all the time, but I'm sure there are certain instances where stuff like that happens, and then the ink bottle is going to break. So diamine in particular tends to break a lot. Whenever winter rolls around, we know that any diamine ink going to Canada is at risk. But you know, basically, other than that, it doesn't really happen all that often. I would guess something like 0.03% have been like legitimate broken in transit. And that's a really, really pretty low percentage. Sometimes there's a leak that happens when there's like, you know, the cap isn't on tight enough or something like that. You know, it really doesn't have anything to do with what we're doing. It's just the bottle comes to us and then it ships out and it's leaked a little bit. That happens sometimes. That really, how we pack it can't really affect it there. So there is some of that. We'll always make it right, whatever is going on. But basically, that's kind of it. So it's pretty rare that we get a legitimate, straight up broken shipment because we really do pack the living daylights out of it. Mary P on Facebook asked, would it be possible for you guys to have a flat shipping rate over a certain price point for your international customers in the future? Shipping tends to add up and make things more expensive than eBay or Amazon sometimes, and we would love to buy from you guys. Oh man, this has been a tough one, Mary, and what makes it really tough is places like eBay and Amazon, they don't have like a whole variety of things that they pack up into one order and then ship out. Usually if you're shopping eBay, Amazon type situation, you're buying one-offs, and they can pretty much price it and factor in the shipping costs with where it's being shipped. It's a lot harder for us with 3,500 products in our store that you could be picking and choosing and putting together into a single order for us to offer a flat shipping price, especially internationally, because the prices range so much based on where it's going. How much it weighs is the biggest factor, and the shipping method that you select. So really, like, you can have one package that could be $10, now maybe $15 if it's really inexpensive, or it could be $50 if it's shipped express instead of first class. So obviously, if we wanted to offer a flat shipping price, we would choose kind of the shipping method and whatnot. But the problem is we are required to offer certain shipping classes over certain dollar amounts because of insurance reasons and stuff like that. So trying to offer a flat thing would be a challenge. And essentially what we would end up having to do is charge a lot more for less expensive packages to accommodate for the more expensive ones that we would end up having to kind of balance out. So I'm not really sure it would end up benefiting all that much if we were to do that, unless we were just kind of losing our shirts. We charge based on weight for international. So we have a shipping calculator and everything. So it's based on weight, it's based on what country you're in, and then we have live shipping rates that kind of calculate everything. And then that all kind of factors in to what your shipping price is. So what you're seeing when you're calculating the price on our site is kind of a real-time calculation to give you kind of the most economical method that we are able to without essentially subsidizing it and losing money on our shipping, which is probably what a lot of eBay and Amazon are doing, is they're losing money on shipping and making up for it in the cost of the product, which is a lot easier to do when you're selling a single product at a time, especially a pen or something where you've got more margin to play with. With something like ink and paper and stuff like that, we would lose our shirts. I know we would if we were to start doing that, unless we charged, you know, a pretty hefty flat fee. And then if you're buying smaller amounts of stuff, you're still paying a pretty large shipping amount. So logistically, it's been super complicated. We haven't been able to find a good way to do that. So that's why we have kind of the variable shipping rates for international that we do have. It's probably a little bit easier for a larger company like eBay or Amazon to do that because they have agreements with different shipping suppliers, especially internationally. Maybe they have negotiated rates because they're doing such a large volume that they can equalize some of that stuff and absorb some of those things to make it more predictable. We're a smaller fish in a big ocean, so we have to absorb a lot of that, and we don't have a lot of those kind of tools at our disposal at this point to be able to do that kind of stuff. So Maybe not the answer you wanted to hear, but that's kind of the ins and outs of some of the logistics that go on for shipping. And the last question I have for this week, this is going to be from Brandon D on Facebook. What previous social media experience does your team have? And do you stay so proactive on so many, what previous social media experience does your team have? And do you stay so proactive on so many different platforms? Okay, grammatically I don't really get that, but you know, basically how do we stay so proactive on so many different platforms, I think is what you're getting at. You guys kill it with everything you post. Being someone going into social media after school, I would love to know. Well, Brandon, I don't have like a magic bullet answer for you. Basically, none of our folks on our media team, including myself, really have much professional or academic experience in social media. I guess my professional experience would be having shot however many videos now, close to 1,000 probably, and having done 1,200 blog posts or whatever number it is. I don't really count anymore, but you know, it's all been just kind of grassroots experience, time on forums, blogging, writing, shooting videos, making tons and tons and tons of mistakes and learning from them, reading books on the subject, reading lots of, you know, Copy Blogger and Pro Blogger and stuff like, you know, stuff like that. I was about to say BuzzFeed, but Buffer. You know, there's lots of good articles and stuff out there on how to do social media. Lots of good kind of gurus that are doing it. Gary Vaynerchuk is one that I followed a lot. He's influenced kind of the way we've done some stuff. You know, and there's lots of good other resources. Honestly, modeling after other people that have done a really good job too is really a good strategy. There's lots of good podcasts and things like that following. So there's lots of good resources, almost too many. So you have to kind of sift through them a little bit. But basically we've hired people with very little experience into it. And it's only really pretty recently we've even had people other than myself or Rachel in the social media realm. It was previously just us kind of doing everything for the first 5 years of this business. Pretty much it was exclusively us. So that's where a lot of it kind of came from the ground up, and now we have a more intentional team we put together, and we focus more on training them kind of the way of Goulet. But probably the biggest influence in the last year and a half, especially as we built a team and needed to explain kind of the way we do things, a lot of that has come from kind of the Gary Vaynerchuk jab, 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 right hook approach of, he talks a lot in there about native platforms. So basically, you don't post the same stuff the same way on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest. You know, you have to understand the context of each of these different platforms. Who is your audience on Instagram versus YouTube? You know, we are on Instagram, YouTube, Reddit, Pinterest, FPN, Facebook. We have Google+, we don't do much on it. YouTube, might have already said it, might even be duplicating myself here. We got our blog. Various other places that we also kind of pop in and out. And so that's a lot of different places to be. So we kind of have to understand who is on each of these platforms. Like we have a very different audience on YouTube than we do on Instagram. Like YouTube, much more instructional, much more kind of utilitarian, more practical, like the detailed reviews and kind of the more hands-on utilitarian type stuff. Instagram is much more kind of inspirational. It's very heavy picture based. They like kind of quicker things because people are just scrolling through their Instagram feeds, whereas YouTube, at least our audience on YouTube, they'll sit down and watch a 10 or 15 minute video. Well, this is a perfect example. We're here like 53 minutes into a Q&A video, the 89th one. So my YouTube audience here is willing to sit down and make me a part of their life, you know, and that's really awesome, but it's very different than Instagram or Pinterest or Twitter or whatever else. I don't think I said Twitter earlier. Maybe I did. I don't remember, but I didn't have them all written down. But we're in a lot of different places, and it's a lot to keep up with on a daily basis. But we have kind of a plan for who our audience is on each of all these platforms, and we'll definitely have certain types of reviews or content or whatever that we might create that we'll put only on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. But we'll avoid it on YouTube and the blog and etc. We have a lot of stuff that goes on YouTube that never sees Instagram, you know, so it's like we have different things in different places, and we know like kind of who overlaps on certain platforms and so on, so that we know kind of how to do it. And then, you know, our newsletter, we kind of round it all up and kind of post to all those different places. And a lot of times there's like cross-platform stuff and whatever, but you know, like I'll promote Periscope a lot more on YouTube here because you're already used to watching me in a video format. You like the Q&A thing, so I'm like, hey, Periscope, check it out. Twitter audience, Periscope too, because it's linked up. Twitter owns Periscope now, and so it's very easy there. But we don't push Periscope on Instagram. We never talk about Periscope on Pinterest. You know, so it's like you have to kind of understand where you're at. And a lot of that has been experimentation because these platforms are changing constantly. You know, if you're going to school for social media, you know, heaven help you, because I don't know what, probably the information you have is mostly outdated by the time you actually graduate, as it is in most technical fields. But it's more you're learning how to learn. So hopefully what you're learning, when social media came out, what am I talking about? When Facebook came out, it was in 2004. I was a junior in college, so and that's when Facebook was college only, and so I was kind of there, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And then like, obviously we're still on Facebook now, but it's like Instagram has come about, Pinterest, Periscope, Snapchat, you name it. We don't really do anything on Snapchat because we don't really have much of an audience there, but Snapchat is apparently a huge up and coming thing that a lot of people are on, but I have like 2 people ever that have asked me to be on Snapchat. It's just not where a lot of our audience is, so I'm not going to go sticking myself in there if that's not where everybody is. But I don't know, maybe if you're on Snapchat and you really want to see me do some stuff on Snapchat, let me know. I have the app, I've played around with it a little bit, but the whole Snapchat stories thing was pretty cool. But honestly, now that we have Periscope, it's much more interactive. I like that better. It just works better for me. Snapchat just doesn't work as well for me for where I'm at. So anyway, all that to say that basically our strategy has been a lot of trial and error, learn as we go type stuff, and then a lot of our education on the matter has come from either trying it ourselves or reading up on kind of the ways that it's done, and really just kind of feeling out, you know, where you guys are talking. You know, FPN started out, that's kind of where I got my start, FPN and Twitter, and then that's kind of where people were. And then as people were there and they started to explore other platforms too, we started posting other places, and we found what works for us naturally. Video is a very good form for us, so we love YouTube, love Periscope. Instagram video hasn't been as popular for us for some reason. So I don't know, there's a lot of experimentation still to be done. Really, in the grand scheme of things, everybody's still trying to figure out what the heck is going on with social media. It's still a pretty new format of media in general. It's very buzzworthy and stuff now, but you know, those who are on kind of the cusp, on the forefront of it, are really doing a lot of experimentation, and that's kind of where we're at too. So yeah, you'll see me on Periscope. You'll see me. It's a very new platform. You'll see me washing my dishes and making my kids' lunches and cleaning out my pens and stuff like that, because it's all kind of the Wild West on Periscope right now. So you're going to see a lot of very raw stuff. Whereas me sitting down on a YouTube video like this, I've done hundreds of YouTube videos. It's going to be much better presented, more packaged, and so on. So hopefully that gives you some kind of answer, Brandon. But basically, if you're looking to go into the social media field, you didn't ask me, but my advice for you is going to be make sure you know what the heck is going on each of the platforms that you're on. Don't just go in guns a-blazing, posting stuff all over the place on a new platform that you don't know anything about. Make sure you know who's there, the etiquette, the context of that platform, and the audience that's there before you start going nuts, okay? That's kind of my advice, and that's where Gary Vee really kind of pushes that. So that covers all of the questions for this week. My question of the week for you to post in the comments is, going back to 45 minutes or so ago, talking about ink. So I would like to know what ink you think is the single most beautiful ink that you've ever used. Whether it's unique or you just like it or whatever, it's your color, whatever parameter you want to put, just what is the one most beautiful ink, fountain pen ink, to you. I'd love to hear what that is. So post that on YouTube or on the blog, in the comments, tweet it out, whatever, just let me know. I'd love to hear it. So that's all I've got for this week. I'll be picking up next week with episode 90. It's pretty crazy. When we hit 100, it's gonna blow my mind, but we're still a few months away from that. So hope you have a great weekend and a great rest of your week. Be sure to subscribe to YouTube if you haven't already. Check me out on Periscope, @Goulet Pens, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. We're in lots of places. Just go searching for Goulet and we'll probably come up. So I hope you like this video. I'm gonna go eat lunch now because I'm pretty hungry. I don't know why I said that, but anyway, thanks so much for watching. Right on.